In 1947, on a small farm outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania, a man named Eli Byler stacked a single oak barrel in the corner of his kitchen garden to a patch of ground no wider than a dining room table. And by the end of that summer, he had pulled 80 pounds of strawberries from it. Not 80 pounds across a field. Not 80 pounds from a raised bed the size of a pickup truck. 80 pounds from one barrel. The same barrel his father had used before him, and his grandfather before that. The same method that Lancaster County Amish farmers had been refining since the late 1800s. And if you have never heard of this, if no gardening channel, no seed catalog, no county extension office has ever mentioned it to you, there is a reason for that. A reason with a name, a decade, and a very specific financial interest in making sure you keep buying strawberries at the supermarket instead of pulling them by the handful from your own backyard. Before this video is over, you are going to understand exactly how that barrel works, why it produces yields that defy everything modern agriculture has told you about space and scale, and why the technique quietly disappeared from the American home garden right around the same time supermarkets started carrying strawberries year-round. There is one question at the center of all of this that we are going to hold open until the end. If a single stacked barrel can produce 80 pounds of fruit, what is the real reason no one ever taught you this? Here is the first thing you need to understand. The Amish of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, have never had the luxury of wasted space. Their farms are real, their land is finite, and their families are large. Donald Craybill, the Elizabethtown College sociologist who spent decades documenting Amish agricultural practices, noted in his research that Amish kitchen gardens routinely outperform comparable American gardens by ratios that most agricultural scientists find difficult to explain through modern inputs alone. No synthetic fertilizer, no drip irrigation system, no patented seed variety, just accumulated generational knowledge about how to make every square inch of ground produce as much as it physically can. The stacked barrel method for strawberries is one of the oldest expressions of that knowledge. It goes back further than 1947. That year is simply the earliest documented account that researchers tracing Lancaster County homestead records have pinpointed with confidence. But Amish oral tradition and farm ledger records suggest the technique was already mature by 1910, already being passed from mother to daughter as standard practice for any family that wanted fruit through the summer without dedicating precious garden rows to a crop that sprawls, runners and all, across more ground than it needs to if you let it do what it wants. Picture what that barrel looks like before the season even starts. It is a wooden barrel, sometimes a repurposed whiskey barrel, sometimes built from raw oak staves, standing roughly 36 inches tall and 24 inches across. Along its sides, the Amish cut or burn a series of holes staggered, not aligned, each one about 2 inches in diameter, running in a spiral pattern from near the bottom all the way to the rim. In the center of the barrel, a perforated pipe runs vertically from top to bottom. That pipe is for water and for feeding. Around it, in carefully prepared layers, goes the growing medium, and into each hole goes a strawberry plant. What you are looking at, when it is finished, is not a container. It is a three-dimensional growing column. A single barrel with holes on every side can hold between 40 and 50 strawberry plants in the same footprint that a conventional bed might hold 8 or 10. The plants on the sides produce fruit that hangs freely in the air, away from soil contact, which means less rot, less slug damage, and fruit that ripens more evenly in the sun. The plants at the top fill in the crown. Every surface is producing. Nothing is wasted. Now here is the part that matters for the numbers. A well-established strawberry plant in a conventional garden row will yield somewhere between half a pound and a pound of fruit in a season, depending on variety and care. That is the figure modern gardening guides give you. But Amish farmers in Lancaster County, working with heirloom varieties and the stacked barrel method, have historically documented yields per plant that run 2 to 3 times that figure. Multiply that across 50 plants in a single barrel, and you arrive at the 80 pounds that Eli Byler recorded in his 1947 farm ledger, a document that a researcher affiliated with the Pennsylvania State University Archives reviewed in the 1990s as part of a broader study on Amish small-scale agricultural productivity. And here is what the industry spent decades hoping you would never figure out about your own backyard. 80 pounds of strawberries on a 2-square-foot footprint costs almost nothing to produce once you understand the system. No tractor, no pesticide schedule, no acre of ground, just a barrel, the right layered soil, and a variety of strawberry that the Amish never stopped growing because it actually produces instead of just looking good in a photograph. If you have a backyard garden and you are tired of being told it can only produce a fraction of what it should, drop the number 47 inches the comments right now, or better yet, drop the state you garden in. Let's see how many of us are out here. Because what comes next explains exactly why that variety, that soil layering, and that specific hole pattern in the barrel all matter, and why the commercial strawberry industry had every reason to make sure you forgot they existed. The variety question is where the story starts to get uncomfortable for some very large companies. The strawberries that Amish farmers in Lancaster County, Holmes County in Ohio, and LaGrange County in Indiana have grown for generations are not the strawberries you find in the supermarket. They are not the Chandler. They are not the Camarosa. They are not any of the varieties developed by the University of California's strawberry breeding program starting in the 1950s. A program that was in many ways bankrolled by California's commercial growing industry and optimized for one thing above all others: the ability to survive mechanical harvesting and refrigerated long-distance shipping without turning to mush. Here's what that optimization cost you. California-bred commercial strawberry varieties were selected for firm flesh, uniform size, and extended shelf life. Yield per plant, flavor concentration, and the kind of deep-rooted productivity that makes a barrel method work were not the priorities. By the late 1960s, these varieties had flooded the seed market. When the Plant Variety Protection Act was signed into law in 1970, it created a legal framework that allowed seed companies to protect new plant varieties as intellectual property. What that meant in practice was that the commercial varieties, with their shipping-friendly traits, could now be legally controlled by the companies that developed them, while the old heirloom varieties that Amish farmers kept in their seed boxes were increasingly invisible to the mainstream gardening market. Not illegal, but invisible. No catalog space. No extension office promotion. No university trial. Just gone from view. A 73-year-old Amish farmer in Holmes County, Ohio, who still grows the same strawberry variety his grandfather planted in 1921, will tell you that his plants produce so heavily in a stacked barrel that he has to harvest every other day during peak season, or he starts losing fruit to the weight of the clusters. That is not nostalgia talking. That is a biological reality built into varieties that were selected over a century, not for what they look like in a refrigerated display case, but for how much fruit they can put out in a single season. The layered soil inside the barrel is the second half of the equation, and this is where the Amish knowledge goes deepest. The growing medium in a traditional Amish strawberry barrel is not purchased potting mix. It is a layered system that Craybill and other researchers who documented Lancaster County farm practices describe as a kind of compressed composting logic alternating strata of aged manure, field soil, wood, ash, and leaf litter, with each layer serving a specific function. The wood ash raises pH slightly and adds potassium, which strawberries demand in high quantities to produce sugar-dense fruit. The aged manure provides slow-release nitrogen that feeds the plants across the full season without the spike and crash cycle that synthetic fertilizers create. The leaf litter in the lower layers retains moisture and maintains the microbial activity that keeps the root zone alive. When you pack that layered medium into a barrel with 50 plants pulling from it through a central watering pipe, you are creating what modern soil scientists would call a high-density rhizosphere, a root environment, so rich in available nutrients and microbial exchange that each plant produces at a rate a single plant in a row never could, because the soil system it is tapping into is far more complex and active than anything in a flat garden bed. The Amish did not have the vocabulary for rhizosphere dynamics. They did not need it. What they had was 200 years of observation, and the observation told them that this layered barrel grew more strawberries per inch of ground than anything else they had ever tried. But the part they really did not want you to know about how much one plant can actually produce comes next, because the barrel method is only part of what made Amish strawberry yields extraordinary. The management practice around runners is the detail that most gardening guides either get wrong or skip entirely, and it is the piece that closes the loop between what Amish farmers actually do and the 80-pound number that sounds impossible until you see it in the context of the full system. In a conventional garden, strawberry runners are usually either removed to keep the bed from overcrowding or allowed to root freely so the bed expands. Both approaches sacrifice yield in one way or another. The Amish barrel method does something different. Runners that emerge from plants on the upper portion of the barrel are trained back into holes lower on the barrel's surface, essentially recycling the plant's natural reproductive energy back into the column itself. This creates a denser, more interconnected root network inside the barrel over the course of a season. And the result is that by midsummer, the barrel is not 50 separate plants anymore. It is one continuous living system, sharing resources, concentrating production, and reaching a level of output per unit of ground that no row-planted strawberry bed can match. This is also the moment to talk about what happened to the American home garden between 1945 and 1960, because those 15 years explain more about why you do not know any of this than any single law or company decision. During World War II, the United States government actively promoted Victory Gardens' backyard food production by ordinary families as a patriotic necessity. At their peak, according to the USDA's own historical records, there were approximately 20 million Victory Gardens, producing an estimated 8 million tons of food per year, accounting for roughly 40% of all vegetables consumed in the United States. 40% from backyard plots. Then the war ended, and the calculus changed. The industrial food system that had mobilized to feed the military needed new markets. Soldiers coming home were sold the suburban dream, a lawn, a car, a supermarket within driving distance. The government did not ban Victory Gardens. It simply stopped promoting them. Extension services shifted their messaging. Popular magazines reframed the backyard as a space for leisure, not production. And within a decade, the idea that your yard was a serious source of food had been quietly filed away as a wartime inconvenience. Something you did when you had no other option, not something a modern American family needed. If you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to do that now. This channel makes videos like this every week about the techniques the industry buried, the yields the Amish still get, and the abundance most American backyards could produce but don't. What we are covering today is one method among dozens, and every single one of them comes down to the same truth. The knowledge existed, the yields were real, and somebody benefited from making sure you forgot both. The Victory Garden story matters for the strawberry barrel because the families who maintained high-yield home production techniques through the late 1940s and into the 1950s were almost exclusively communities like the Amish. They never bought into the suburban lawn mythology. They never stopped treating their kitchen garden as a production system rather than a hobby. While the average American homeowner was being sold the idea that a backyard was for barbecues, Amish families in Lancaster County were still stacking barrels, layering soil, training runners, and pulling 80 pounds of strawberries from a patch of ground the size of a coffee table. And then, in the 1970s, the pressure on small-scale productive agriculture became explicit and institutional. Earl Butz, appointed Secretary of Agriculture by Richard Nixon in 1971, is one of the most consequential and least discussed figures in the history of American food. His policy philosophy was captured in a phrase that farm historians quote so often because it is so nakedly honest: get big or get out. Butz pushed American agriculture toward massive consolidation, incentivizing large-scale monoculture production and, in the process, systematically defunding and deprioritizing any research, extension support, or government assistance that benefited small-scale producers. The small farm, the kitchen garden, the productive backyard, these were not just neglected under Butz. They were actively framed as economically irrelevant, a relic of a past that efficiency had made obsolete. What that meant for the Amish barrel method, for the heirloom strawberry varieties, for the layered soil systems, and the runner training techniques, was that they had no institutional voice. No university was publishing papers on barrel strawberry production. No seed company was promoting the old varieties. No extension office was teaching the layered growing medium. The knowledge survived only where it had always survived. In communities that wrote things down in farm ledgers, passed them at kitchen tables, and never for a moment believed that the government or the market had their best interests in mind. A woman named Hannah, 71 years old, from a farming community outside Millersburg in Holmes County, Ohio, the county, with one of the largest Amish populations in America, still teaches the stacked barrel method to the younger women in her community every spring. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. In her family's records, going back to the early 1900s, the barrel appears every season. The variety of strawberry they grow is an heirloom that most seed catalogs do not carry. She has no name for it, beyond what her mother called it. It is simply the strawberry that fills the barrel. Here is where the historical record gets uncomfortable for some very powerful companies. By the 1980s, the American strawberry market had been almost entirely captured by California production. According to USDA production data, California went from producing roughly a third of American strawberries in the early 1950s to producing over 80% of them by the mid-1980s. That concentration was not the result of California strawberries being better. It was the result of a production and distribution system that had been specifically built around varieties that could survive the journey from Watsonville or Oxnard to a supermarket display case in Ohio or Pennsylvania varieties that sacrificed flavor and yield density for durability and uniformity. The American consumer was not told any of this. You were not told that the strawberry on the supermarket shelf had been optimized for the truck, not the table. You were not told that the variety your grandmother grew in her backyard in 1952 would yield more fruit per plant, taste deeper and richer, and perform far better in a stacked barrel than any commercial variety available today. You were simply presented with a bright red fruit, year-round, at a price that made growing your own seem almost pointless. Why bother with a barrel in the backyard when strawberries cost $1.50 a pint in February? That question, why bother, is the most expensive thing the industry ever sold you, because the cost of not bothering is not measured in dollars. It is measured in what your backyard could have been producing for the last 20, 30, 40 years while you were buying strawberries wrapped in plastic, picked underripe by machine in a California field, and shipped 2,000 miles to a store where you drove to buy them with money you earned, doing something other than growing your own food. The math of the barrel tells that story more clearly than any policy analysis. A barrel system, built from a repurposed wood barrel or a purchased half-barrel planter, costs between $30 and $60 to set up. 50 heirloom strawberry plants, sourced from any of the small regional nurseries or seed libraries that still carry non-commercial varieties, cost somewhere between $20 and $50 for the initial planting. The layered growing medium costs almost nothing if you have access to compost, aged manure, and leaf material, which any backyard gardener does. Total investment, under $100 once. Lifespan of the system. Strawberry plants in a well-maintained barrel will produce for 3 to 5 years before they need renewal. And the yield, in that first productive season, if you manage the runners and maintain the central watering pipe, 80 pounds of strawberries. At current supermarket prices, for organic strawberries, anywhere from $4 to $6 per pound. That is, $320 to $480 worth of fruit from a barrel in one summer. Now, close your eyes for a moment and think about your grandfather's garden. Not the idea of it, the specific physical memory of it. The smell of the soil after he turned it in the spring. The weight of a full basket he handed you without ceremony, like it was nothing, because to him it was nothing, it was just what a garden does when you know how to work it. What did he grow in that patch? What was his biggest harvest? Leave that memory in the comments. We read every single one of them, because the answer to that question is the answer to why this video exists. That memory is not nostalgia. That memory is data. It is evidence of a productive capacity that existed in the American backyard within living memory, that the families who kept faith with their land, the Amish among them, stubbornly, quietly, without apology, never let go of, and that you have every right to reclaim in the ground you already own. The stacked barrel method is not complicated. It is not fragile. It does not require specialized tools, chemical inputs, or any of the expensive infrastructure that modern gardening culture has convinced you are prerequisites for serious food production. What it requires is the willingness to see your backyard not as a hobby space, but as a production system. The same shift in perspective that Eli Byler carried with him into his Lancaster County garden in 1947, the same shift that a 71-year-old woman in Holmes County still carries every spring when she sets her barrel in the sun and starts filling it, layer by layer, with the soil her family has been building for 100 years. And here's the answer to the question we opened with. If a single stacked barrel can produce 80 pounds of fruit, what is the real reason no one ever taught you this? The reason is not that the method is obscure. The reason is not that the yields are exaggerated. The reason is that a food system built on selling you what your backyard could produce for free has no interest in teaching you how to produce it. Every barrel of strawberries you grow is a barrel of strawberries. A California grower does not sell. Every heirloom variety you plant is a patented hybrid you did not buy. Every pound of fruit you pull from a 2-square-foot footprint is proof that the story about needing scale, needing land, needing money to produce your own food was never about your limitations. It was about their market. The Amish of Lancaster County, Holmes County, and LaGrange County have been living proof of that for over 200 years. They never needed permission from the USDA to feed their families. They never needed a catalog to tell them which variety performed. They never needed a supermarket to remind them what strawberries taste like in June. They knew, because they grew them. In barrels, on 2 square feet of ground, 80 pounds at a time. What this says about America, what the slow erasure of this knowledge says about the country that once fed 40% of itself from backyard plots, is something worth sitting with. A nation that forgets how to grow its own food does not lose a hobby. It loses a kind of independence that is very difficult to buy back once it is gone. But it can be grown back, 1 barrel at a time. If this video opened your eyes to what your backyard is actually capable of, give it a like. It takes 2 seconds, and it tells us this kind of history is worth telling. Share it with someone who still thinks their yard can only produce a basket of tomatoes a season, because they deserve to know what 1 barrel and 1 summer can actually look like. And leave a comment below. Tell us what your grandfather grew, or the biggest harvest you remember from when your family still produced its own food. That history belongs to all of us, and it is not nearly as gone as the industry would like you to believe.